canals of Scotland do not announce themselves loudly. They do not roar like factories or thunder like railways. They wait. At first glance, they seem gentle, peaceful, almost decorative. But these waterways once carried the weight of a nation: coal, iron, timber, people, ambition. This is not just the story of canals. It is the story of how Scotland learned to move itself. Scotland before canals, a land divided by its own beauty. For most of its history, Scotland's landscape worked against it. Mountains fractured communities. Glens isolated entire regions. Rivers flowed where they wished, not where trade demanded. Overland travel was slow and punishing. Roads were primitive, muddy, and often impassable for months at a time. Wheeled carts struggled. Pack animals carried limited loads. A journey of a few dozen miles could take days, sometimes weeks. Sea travel offered an alternative, but it came with its own risks. Storms, rocky coastlines, long detours around the north of Britain. Trade was possible, but inefficient. Industry existed, but it was constrained. Scotland had resources: coal, iron, timber, but lacked the ability to move them cheaply and reliably. And in the pre-industrial world, movement meant survival. The pressure of change, industry creates demand. By the mid-18th century, Scotland was changing. Population increased, cities expanded, manufacturing accelerated. Coal was no longer a local fuel. It was a strategic necessity. Ironworks required constant supply. Urban households demanded heat. Ports needed raw materials to trade abroad. The old systems collapsed under new demand. Road improvements helped, but only marginally. Sea routes remained dangerous and indirect. The solution was radical for its time. Build new rivers where none existed. Artificial waterways. Controlled gradients. Predictable movement. Canals. The canal idea: engineering meets ambition. Canals were not a Scottish invention, but adopting them at scale was a gamble. They required enormous upfront investment, years of labor, unprecedented coordination. Land had to be cut, leveled, and reshaped. Water had to be managed with mathematical precision. Locks, still a relatively new technology, made it possible to raise and lower boats across changes in elevation. Where nature resisted, engineering insisted. The promise was simple. Water transport was far cheaper than land transport. One horse could pull a boat carrying dozens of tons. If canals worked, they would change everything. The Forth and Clyde Canal, Scotland's industrial spine. The first true test came with the Forth and Clyde Canal. The vision was audacious. Connect the River Forth on the east coast to the River Clyde on the west. Sea to sea, east to west. A direct inland route across the country. Construction began in the late 1760s. The canal cut through central Scotland, linking coalfields, towns, and ports. Stone locks rose where land once stood uninterrupted. Towpaths traced new lines across the countryside. When it opened, the effect was immediate. Coal prices fell. Transport times collapsed. Factories multiplied. Glasgow, once limited by geography, became a commercial force. This canal did not merely serve industry, it created it. Engineering reality: how the canals actually worked. The canals were not passive channels of water. They were carefully controlled systems. Locks functioned as water elevators. Gates sealed chambers. Valves regulated flow. Everything depended on balance. Too much water and banks failed. Too little and boats ran aground. Horses walked towpaths, pulling boats at a steady pace. Boatmen lived with the water, understanding its moods. Maintenance was constant. Stone cracked, wood rotted. Ice halted movement in winter. This was infrastructure that demanded care, not neglect. The Union Canal: precision over power. The success of the Western Connection led to an Eastern refinement: the Union Canal. Designed to link Edinburgh into the canal network, it reflected a different philosophy. No locks. A perfectly level waterway. Achieving this required extraordinary precision. Instead of raising and lowering boats, engineers raised the land itself, using massive aqueducts to carry water across valleys. The Avon Aqueduct, in particular, stood as a declaration. Water would go where engineering commanded. The Union Canal was quiet, efficient, and elegant. It represented the canal system at its most refined. The Caledonian Canal, the Highlands Challenge. The most ambitious project of all was the Caledonian Canal. Rather than crossing lowlands, it cut through the highlands along the Great Glen Fault line. Its purpose was strategic as much as commercial. Ships sailing around the north of Scotland faced some of the most dangerous waters in Europe. An inland route promised safety and speed. Designed by Thomas Telford, the canal stitched together natural locks with man-made cuts. It took nearly 2 decades to complete. The terrain was unforgiving, costs ballooned, labor was relentless. When it finally opened, reality intervened. Ships had grown larger during construction. Many could not use the canal. Commercial traffic never reached expectations. Yet the canal reshaped the Highlands. It provided employment, improved communication, left behind some of the most striking engineering in Scotland, including Neptune's staircase, a monumental sequence of locks. Measured in profit, it struggled. Measured in impact, it endured. Canal life, floating communities. The canals were not just transport routes, they were homes. Boat families lived aboard year-round. Children grew up on moving water. Entire lives unfolded between locks. Towpaths became social corridors. News traveled boat to boat. A shared culture emerged. Time moved differently on the canals, slower, more deliberate. It was a life shaped by water levels, weather, and routine. Decline when speed won. The canals did not fail, they were surpassed. Railways arrived with speed and reliability canals could not match. Steel tracks ignored weather and elevation. Schedules replaced tides. Cargo moved to trains. Investment followed. By the late 19th century, many canals fell quiet. Some were abandoned. Others filled in or repurposed. Maintenance ceased. The waterways that built industrial Scotland faded into the background. Rediscovery and restoration. A second life. In the late 20th century, attitudes changed. What had been obsolete was reevaluated, not as industry, but as heritage. Restoration projects revived canals as public spaces. Walking paths replaced tow ropes. Kayaks replaced cargo barges. Communities returned to the water. The most visible symbol of this rebirth is the Falkirk Wheel, a rotating boat lift connecting canal levels with modern engineering flair. Old infrastructure gained new purpose. Closing reflection. What the canals remind us. Scotland's canals were built slowly, by hand, with intent. They remind us that progress was once measured in patience, not speed. These waterways still hold the shape of the past. Stone remembers labor. Water remembers motion. They no longer power factories, but they still carry stories. And sometimes, the quietest paths reveal the most about how a nation was built.
Be a stranger than you think. From forgotten battles to bizarre inventions, we uncover the stories that make you say, "What the history?"